I think also, in practical terms, the Electoral College forces candidates for office to go to places that they would not go to if it was strictly a popular vote. You'd go where the votes were. You'd spend all your time in California or New York, kind of, sort of run up your tally in places where you knew you were, if you were a Democrat, if you were a Republican, you'd probably spend most of your time in the South. But you wouldn't go to Alaska, you wouldn't go to the Dakotas, you wouldn't go to a lot of places. Well, except in 2000, remember, both Bush and Gore spent lots of time in Iowa and other places like that, which I'm confident would not be the case if it were strictly a popular vote. So, my mind's, I won't have anything to say about it. My mind's open, but it seems to me the case has not yet been made to take I'm a true conservative with a capital C when it comes to amending the Constitution. I don't think it should be done unless there's an overwhelming justification for it. Yeah.
What are some of the other non-politicians that influence government or politics during the administration? Some other people that are the outside of pure politics.
The nature of the beast in those days was that there weren't many people outside. It was Americans were born and they were registered as male or female and Republican and Democrat, maybe Methodist or Catholic. Literally, people identified themselves. You had turnout in those years, 1870s, 1880s. First of all, it was a time of incredible balance. Most of those presidential elections are very close. But look at the number. You had 90% turnout of the electorate. And it's because people really identified with the parties. They operated within that system. There weren't a lot of outside influences, as would be the case today. There weren't a lot of outside associations. You didn't have the mass media, in some ways calling the shots. It was a very, very closed, if you will, in some ways insular culture. But it was a culture that produced much greater participation than is the case today. Yeah.
I think that might be partially because the electorate has more access to the candidates than we do today.
Well, that's good. Yeah. Well, for one thing, there were just a whole lot fewer of us. We're talking about a country with 30 million people, 40 million later in the period. And we didn't have the mass media. We didn't have the diversions. We didn't have the entertainments that we have today. Politics was our entertainment. Politics was, it fulfilled a variety of roles that today no longer is the case. Today it's entertainment, but it's, Jon Stewart and Saturday Night Live. But anyway, anything else? Yeah.
Before the Civil War up to this period.
There's a lot more, believe me.
And a lot more of them. And do you think there's a correlation in America between the push to the excess that does create all sorts of advances and then the reform? Do you think we sort of float back and forth?
Well, I think we float back and forth in a number of ways, but I think it's more war and the aftermath of war. I don't misunderstand me, but the fact of the matter is war is an incubator of innovation in many, many ways. It is also a great centralizer of authority. Well, the Constitution is like an accordion, and inevitably there's a reaction after the war. If you look at every single war, certainly after the Civil War, certainly after World War I, to some degree after World War II, certainly after Vietnam, you see that the presidency, which has so expanded, is in many ways under great pressure from Congress and other forces. With that level of innovation and that level of centralization, the fact is, for a long time we all thought of the robber barons as robber barons. one of the fascinating things that's happening now among historians, and I think it's even beginning to percolate out to the general public, is we're looking at them in a different light. We don't see them simply as whiskered, tobacco-chewing vulgarians with pot bellies and dollar signs on their vests. They are the second generation of American revolutionaries. It was an economic revolution that they brought about. They laid the groundwork for modern industrial America with all that that portends. That is a direct result of the Civil War. Before the Civil War, most people never had any contact with the federal government except from the post office. With the Civil War, you had the first income tax. You had all sorts of, some people thought, abuses of executive power. Once the war ended, there was a reaction against that, and you had a presidency that was weakened for most of the rest of the century. But even, again, every one of these Gilded Age presidents, all of whom tend to collectively be written off as non-entities, every one of them displayed courage in his own way. Hayes, I chose to focus on Hayes because, again, the cliche is so entrenched and the reality is so much more interesting. But I could say that of Chester Arthur, I could say it of Benjamin Harris, and certainly Grover Cleveland. Andrew Johnson's beyond the pale. He's worse than you heard. But we're still recovering from Andrew Johnson. Anyway, I know you had one last question. Are you an Andrew Johnson fan? I'm sorry. Are you going to make the case? Well, that won't take long. Mm. Well, I think it was enormous. And again, frankly, there's a certain amount of crony capitalism, you know. But you know what? Look at what they produced. Rockefeller, I'm biased, I'm writing about Nelson, which means, you have to know about John D. John D. broke a lot of rules. Fortunately for him, they were not yet codified in the law. But do you know, if you were poor, John D. Rockefeller single-handedly reduced the price of kerosene by 75%. What he did was, of course, was clear out all the competitors, all the inefficiency, as he put it. He said the age of the individual is past. Curious sort of observation. And you could understand why lots of Americans were appalled by this. But they might have been appalled, but they were perfectly willing to, to take advantage of the cheaper product that he produced. Modernization, standardization. There's a reason it's called the Standard Oil Company. They set the standard in many ways. They also bribed legislators. They also abused authority. Nelson Rockefeller once said, my grandfather didn't break the law, but he did cause a lot of laws to be written. It's a nice way of finessing it. Last question.
You mentioned you're writing a book on Nelson Rockefeller. Maybe we have to wait to read the book, but a friend of mine worked for Nelson Rockefeller and claimed that he might have lived through that heart attack that he not lived in a little assignation where they quote librarian that
what role did your friend play as an employee? I mean, what did?
she worked for him, I don't know what capacity previous to that.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that's going to be the best chapter of the book. I'm not going to give it away. So, I will tell you, don't tell Happy. I once said, with my characteristic gift for stepping in it, thinking something and then saying it. I mean, anyway, my problem is I think it and then I say it instead of just thinking of it. I once threatened to entitle the last chapter of my book "Coming and Going." Anyway.